Okay, so another action that may be in that controller is you want to delete an item. So in this case, the user clicks delete, it posts through to the controller, and when we call delete item with an ID of 5, we expect it to call the item server with delete item 5. So basically, what we do is we make the call, and then afterwards, we check the mock to make sure that that call got invoked. So it records all of the interactions with it, but it doesn't. But you only need to verify the ones you are concerned with. That's the sort of the big difference between the default and the easy mock versus the defaults in Mockito. You only need to verify the stuff that's pertinent to this particular test.
Does it record the ordering of the calls?
It can. By default it doesn't, but you can do an in-order one, which makes sure they get called in the correct one.
But it only called delete item once?
Yep. I'll show you some slides in a minute. But yeah, so for the basic cases, normally you're just verifying, or you're saying, when this, then return this, and then you check that the controller uses that in the correct fashion by doing your certs afterwards. Okay. Another good thing is that, yeah, so this is basically, if I hadn't implemented the delete item method in the controller, and we called verify, it'll say wanted but not invoked, item service, delete item 5. So it's got quite friendly error messages when the verification didn't get called. Okay, so here's one test view item with item not found exception. So basically, very similar to the one where we were just saying get item, but instead of saying then return, we say then throw. So basically, it's just the same as having, it just basically means that when you call get item with 5 on the item service, it's going to throw an exception. So you don't need to create a stub for it where you have a special one for this test where it throws an exception no matter what. You can say only throw an exception when you call get item 5. You then call view item with 5, and then you can check the right view is happening, and I've just asserted that's the same exception. So basically, in this case, the controller just put the exception into the model map so it could show the exception to the user or something. It wouldn't want to do that, but it can at least do something with it. So we've seen this one, which is just basically how to set up the test.
How does it actually work? I'm assuming that actually we do when passing something in, it's actually walking, tracking the stack to find out what it called.
The internal details. I use it.
Or you execute that and then passing in the result into there.
Yeah, I think they go to special pains to make sure the stack traces.
You're going to lose more hands.
Okay, so yeah, one of the big things of Mockito versus EasyMock is that Mockito by default will give you sort of sensible return values. So if it's an object, it'll return null. It's sort of normal. If it's an int, it'll give you 0. If it's returning a list, it'll give you an empty list. Now the advantage of this is that when you do something, maybe you're testing one part of the block of the code that is being executed in the controller. That part may need one of the lists, but the other part of code may not need that. But you probably want to test them independently. You don't want one big test that does both of them. And so for the first test, the second part, instead of getting a null list, it'll get an empty list, and it'll probably hopefully just continue on that code and not fail. And so you can keep your test very specific to just the particular case you want, which means that if you then extend that functionality in that controller to have an extra block of functionality, you don't have to go back to all of your tests and say, oh, for all of these, they actually now need to return an empty list, otherwise they will break. So it keeps your tests really agile.
So how do you pronounce the band's first name?
Yeah, I was going to say Mr. Faber.
Source
I have no idea how to say it. So this is one of the guys, I think he may be one of the guys who actually started Mockito. He's got a blog, which if you click through to that, he's actually got some slides, which sort of explain what I'm trying to explain, why Mockito is better than EasyMock, because of these default values. And it keeps your tests very specific to what they need to test, and it means you don't have to refactor all your tests when you add a new piece of functionality to your controller, or to whatever method you're testing. So yeah, that's the points at the bottom, which I took from slide 29 of his. Aggressive validation makes tests brittle. So if you're asserting far too many things in your test, and of course if you change them, all of your tests break instead of just the ones that are related to that piece of functionality. Yeah, and the next one, you have to go back and fix all the tests, which increases noise and leads to overspecification. So your tests are not actually just testing the one bit that they're meant to. Okay. So that's the basics of Mockito, if anyone has any questions before I jump onto the other feature list of things it has. Okay, so yeah, you're saying, can you verify that only called it once, or at least once, this many times, or never? Never's quite handy. If you've got some conditional thing which is if this, save it, otherwise delete it, then you probably want to verify that it did call the save, but you probably also want to verify that it didn't call the delete. Normally you don't verify all of the cases, but you don't verify that it never did all of the methods on the stub, on the mocked object, but sometimes it's good to just choose one of them and say, make sure it didn't actually call delete once it had saved. The next one is in order. So I haven't used this much, but basically in order will create a mock and give you the same interface as it has normally, but then you can just, when you call verify on it, it checks, I think you call verify on the in order, and it just goes through and checks that the calls that were made to those mocks are made in the order you specified. Another one which is maybe sometimes useful is that you can chain subsequent calls. So when I call get item, return item 1. Next time I do it, call item 2. Not sure when it would really be useful. But that's one of the features it has. It also has some argument matches. So for example, if you know it's going to make a call to the service to do something, but you don't care about one of the arguments, you can do something like, the first one is equal to 1, the second one is any float. I'm not too worried what it is for this particular test case, so it helps you not over-specify your tests.
Is it like easy marking that if you use one of those special cases for one of the parameters,
You have to do
use them for
all
all
of
of them?
It's really annoying. Yeah. So what he's saying is you can't have get 1, any float. If you start using matches for one of the arguments, they all have to be matches. I think it has a slightly better error message though, when you do stuff with it.
For your repeated calls thing, that kind of thing's really useful when your code does something like, for as long as there are still items, do something, and when I've done that for all available items, stop. So you say, return an item, return null.
Yep.
Make it fall out of the loop.
Yeah, true. Cool. The last one is that it can mock concrete classes. EasyMock can do this, but you have to use the extension to EasyMock, which was always one version behind the latest version of EasyMock I found anyway. This one sort of bundles it all into one jar. So they have something called Mockito All, which actually does, I think it's called an Uber jar or something. I don't know, basically takes all of them and compiles them all into their own namespaces in the one jar. So it's really, really easy to get started with it. You just need to add one jar to your library and you can mock everything. Mocking concrete classes isn't normally useful in practice. Often a bad practice, but I was doing some swing stuff at one stage, and it was quite useful to be able to just mock the panel to check that it got called in a certain way or something. But yeah, it's not used very often, but it is there if you need it. And that's all I've got, basically. It's sort of a summary on why Mockito is good, how it helps you write quick unit tests that are not requiring large amounts of refactoring every time you change another part of the functionality. And yeah, that's all.
That's cool.
So, of the EasyMock users, would you want
So,
to give it a try?
Yeah, for sure.
So, do you use integration test?
Not often.
So you don't do integration testing, but you do mocking.
I do unit testing.
Oh, so you do unit tests where you do integration testing from end to end.
That's not a unit test. I use JUnit.
Yeah.
I write unit tests. So
Yeah.
a unit test doesn't normally go from your controller to your service. That's an integration test, right? Unit test should be testing one class and how it interacts.
Right. So
Yep.
I mean integration test, I guess.
Right. Yeah, integration tests have their place.
Yep.
But sometimes they can, I don't know. We don't tend to do many of them. But we do have a QA process which writes regression tests that are meant to run. So they kind of do the integration tests in a way.
Right.
Do they do it? Sorry, is that automated or just manual?
Meant to be automated. Yeah. So I tend to write unit tests. I'll start with the DAO, or maybe I'll start the controller probably actually, and I'll say, right, here's a controller, it needs to do these particular actions.
Yep.
And then before I fill in the content of those actions, I'll go, right, what's it going to use? So I start writing the tests. And I say, okay, it's going to need to access a service, like the item service, and it's going to need to pull this through. So I write the test up, and it's all cool. Tests are failing, obviously, because I've not no code. And so I make sure all of the methods are in the interface for the service it needs to call. And then I fill in the code, and these gradually become green, and it's all good. So I know that my control is perfect, as far as all the cases I've thought of, right? And so then you go, okay, right, start developing the service. right, what is the service going to do? It's going to need to load this object and this object from this DAO, this one from this one, do some logic, maybe save one back. And so then I start writing the test for the service. And I say, these are all the things it needs to do. Of course, it fails initially. And then eventually you fill it in, and it's interacting with your mock DAOs and fulfilling all the cases. Then you write the DAOs. DAOs, obviously, there's nothing to mock below it because it's the database. So the database has actually hit the database. One of the good things about all these mocks is that everything runs fast because all of it's in memory. So your controller tests run fast because they're just interacting with a mock object. The mocks run fast because they're interacting with mock DAOs. The DAOs, well, they can run fast because you run them in a transaction which rolls back each time. And so they still run pretty fast, you know, like 1 or 2 seconds for a test case instead of one that exports the whole database every time. So yeah, you test all the layers down until you get to the DAO, and then I let the DAO just do normal DAO tests where I persist things and load them back up.